I'm Cheryl Ann Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for those of us who still dare to want it all, who have big dreams and bold ambitions. I think we deserve to have a big, full life and the freedom to enjoy it. So let's design our next chapter together for brilliance, not burnout. Each week, I'll bring ideas, insight, and a fresh perspective to keep you growing into a life that feels as good as it looks. Brilliant Balance, your life, your way. Now let's get started. This is episode 410 of the Brilliant Balance podcast. And today we're asking a big question. Are you your own worst enemy? Now, I know that might sound a little dramatic, but if you know me and you know this show, you know that we're going to really drop into the pragmatic side of this question. Because if you've ever found yourself stuck in perfectionism, really second guessing your own work or constantly moving the bar higher just when you finally reach it, you might be surprised by how often you are actually the one creating the pressure that's wearing you out. And I promise you, today is not about blaming yourself or piling on more guilt. That is probably the very last thing that you need. But today is really about shining a light on the patterns that make it harder for us to succeed, right? When we are grown-up overachievers, it's not that we're not capable, but sometimes the way that we go about exercising that capability, really fulfilling our potential, can be exhausting. So I want to get really honest with you that sometimes the biggest obstacles in our path aren't obstacles. They aren't the deadlines that we're facing. They aren't difficult clients. They aren't, the competitive job market or how hard it is to raise a toddler or a teenager. They're actually the loops that we are running on in our own minds. And those loops are the thing that can keep us from ever feeling finished or ever feeling even satisfied. And if that resonates with you, then this episode is going to be mind-opening because I think that a lot of you who listen to this show probably find yourself somewhere in this pattern where achievement is a pattern you locked into a long time ago, but knowing what is enough is kind of a chronic source of discontent. And again, my assertion today is it's not always the external pressure that's burning us out. Sometimes it really is the voice in our own heads. I can remember this story so vividly from earlier in my career when I was in my corporate life, and fairly early on, I was prepping for a really big customer presentation, right? One of those moments that felt like my next career move was riding on it. I was in sales at the time, and I had rehearsed this presentation a million times, right? My talking points were really tight. The slides were sharp, like they were done. This was like probably PowerPoint era. So I don't know how sharp they were, but they were done, right? They were overdone. They had builds in them. My boss had looked this over. He had traveled in to work with me to go on this customer call. And he was like, you're good to go. Like, seriously, don't touch this thing. We're good. We kind of signed off on it over dinner, but I couldn't stop. And that night I went back to my apartment and I remember I made a pot of coffee. I sat down at my, stupid little kitchen table that I was using as a second desk. And I convinced myself that there had to be a better way to say slide 3. And then that turned into slide 4 and slide 7. And before I knew it, it was probably after midnight. My eyes are burning. I'd rewritten half this deck. And by the next morning, when it was time to pick him up and go to the customer, I'm running on fumes. And here's the kicker. The customer was super chill about the whole thing. They were going to buy whatever it is that I was selling. They probably didn't notice any single improvement, definitely in finger quotes here, that I had made during my midnight frenzy. All that extra effort, it didn't move the needle. It just drained me. And that was one of the first times that I had to admit that the problem wasn't necessarily my workload. It was my mindset, right? It was more about the way that I was driving myself to some imaginary standard that I had met a long time ago. So if you're a high achiever, right, here's the paradox. The very traits that make you successful can also be the ones that kind of turn inward and start working against you. So I want to break down a few patterns that are often like underneath this level of self-sabotage, because that's what it is, right? We are in our own way to a point that we are never going to feel satisfied. And we are going to keep running ourselves in circles of exhaustion. So there's three things that I'm going to talk about today, at least. There's probably a lot more than this, but three things that I think are underneath this pattern if you really are your own worst enemy. The first one is an overdeveloped inner critic. So we all have a voice in our head who is not kind, right? I call this the inner critic. You might call it your inner mean girl. We've got a lot of psychological terms for this construct. But if you have a really overdeveloped inner critic and you have trained yourself to scan your environment for flaws and to scan your work for what is not yet done, because that's how you improve, like that's how you believe that you get the best work out of yourself. In some situations, that can be good, right? It can be healthy to kind of be able to look at your work and say, what could be better about this? But in many situations, is particularly when you can't turn it off and you end up critiquing everything you do, then even your wins don't feel like wins, right? They just feel like another piece of data to be evaluated about how you could make this better and what you could have done differently. So you might notice this pattern, like if someone compliments you and your instinct is to brush it off, like, oh, it was nothing, or you start explaining what you could have done better before they've even finished telling you did a good job. Those are a couple of signs that your inner critic might be so overdeveloped that it's moved from being a helpful construct to one that is actually quite harmful. Okay. That pattern, again, you are in fact your own worst enemy if you are listening to this inner critic to the detriment of being able to say, you know what, that was good work. I did a good job on that. I'm proud of that. Second pattern that I think gets in the way is a belief that our effort equals our worth. You know, this one runs really deep for a lot of women because if you've been rewarded for hard work your whole life, then somewhere along the way, you start equating your value with your output, like how much I'm getting done. If you're not grinding, you're falling behind, right? If you're not busy, if you don't have a lot to do, if you don't have a lot on your plate, then you're not worth very much. And I think this idea, Brene Brown calls it hustling for our worthiness, right? That belief can keep us in a cycle of overwork, just not ever knowing when to stop, that is less about what's actually needed and more about proving that you deserve your seat at the table. I mean, full stop on that for a second, right? If you recognize that some of the work you are doing is less about what is actually needed and more about proving that you deserve your seat at the table or that you have worth, that is your call to pause, to really check in with yourself about what kind of twisted pattern of behavior this might be creating. Okay. Because if you have a belief that your effort or your output is what is the source of your worth, you will never stop. And that chronic state of overwhelm will just perpetuate itself. Okay. Did you know that beyond hosting this podcast, I also directly support women leaders at the intersection of work and life? As a member of BOLD, you get direct access to me, the women on my team, and a peer group of exceptional women who are rewriting the rules and redefining what it means to have it all together. Go to brilliant-balance.com/bold to learn more and apply for your spot today. And I think these two are kind of related to the third thing, which is a moving definition of success. This is where the finish line keeps getting pushed out. This is one of my Achilles heels, right? You hit a big goal, but instead of letting yourself celebrate, you think next time I'll crush it, right? Or like, oh, that was a good warm-up lap. Now let's see what I can do. It's like running a race where the ribbon moves forward every time you're about to cross it. And without stopping to acknowledge your progress, you can actually rob yourself of the motivation that could fuel your next goal. So if you find that this is a challenge for you, that you're like, okay, got that goal, next, sort of that perpetual moving the finish line out, one of the things to do is to celebrate those wins as milestones. find moments along the path, right, as kind of a bridge to help you until you're able to say that was a full-fledged finish line. I'm going to take a victory lap here and enjoy the applause of the crowd for a second and pat myself on the back and get some water, right? Instead of constantly moving that finish line in this race to exhaustion. Because here's the truth. You cannot bully yourself into greatness. Right? You cannot push yourself relentlessly and beat yourself up at every turn and expect to actually feel fulfilled. You just can't. You can't even expect to perform at your best for very long. This whole pattern is upside down, right? What works far better is learning to see yourself clearly, to see these patterns for what they are, and meet yourself with some self-compassion. And that starts with noticing this narrative that is running through your head, right? So you ask yourself things like, if I were saying this to my best friend, how would it land? Would it be encouraging, right? The things that you're saying to yourself, would they be encouraging if you were saying them to someone else? Or would they cut her down, right? Would they be critical? And then this is the invitation to start practicing what I'm calling self-compassion. Now, that term may sound soft to you. I think a lot of the former overachievers or current overachievers in the world, the word compassion just sounds so Mother Teresa. But let's maybe examine this word with fresh eyes, right? This is not some feel-good luxury. This is actually like a performance strategy. Okay, because the research is really clear that people who show themselves grace when they make mistakes recover faster, right? They learn more and they have more stamina. They keep going for longer. They're actually more resilient because they're not wasting so much energy on self-criticism. And here's the beautiful thing. Self-compassion does not mean lowering your standards. It means removing unnecessary friction so you can actually meet your standards. It's the difference between the coach, if you think back to high school, who says, you've got this, let's adjust and let's try again, right? Hey, good try. Let's make this tweak. Let's try again. Versus the one who's screaming at you until you just quit, right? We've all met those coaches. Some of us had them. Some of us had our children have them. But I want you to try this instead. I want you to notice when you're being harder on yourself than necessary. And I want you to pause and just replace that criticism with the truth, not the fear, not some exaggerated, encouraging hoopla, just the truth. Let your wins land, right? Write them down. Let yourself actually feel the wins, the things that have been successful. Because when you do that, when you notice that you're being harder on yourself than necessary, and you replace that criticism with just truth, not fear, and you let your wins land for a second, then you can stop being your own worst enemy and you can start becoming your own best advocate. It's an entirely different frame to be in relationship with yourself as an advocate versus this critical enemy. Self-advocacy is going to beat self-sabotage every single time. And I think some of us missed the memo. We somehow learned that being really hard on ourselves was the source of motivation. This was the way that we were going to stay sharp and get ahead and, not rest on our laurels. But the next time that harsh voice shows up, you have a choice, right? You can let it run the show like it's been doing and keep you feeling like crap, or you can meet it with a truer, kinder perspective. And when you start making that choice consistently, you're going to be amazed at how much more energy and creativity and confidence you have to put toward the work that actually matters, right? You can stop beating yourself up and start encouraging yourself. So if you listen to my words today, right? Short episode here, and you recognized yourself in this conversation, if you know that you have been standing in your own way, kind of tough loving yourself through life, I think you should think about what life could look like with someone in your corner to remind you who you are, right? Somebody who can remind you that it is okay to actually treat yourself with compassion and become your own best advocate. You might even want to think about joining me in Bold, right? This is the circle I've talked about on the show where really I'm going to call us former overachievers, right? It's not that we're not achieving today. It's that we're ready to lay down that title. And this is where those women can stop sabotaging themselves and start accelerating forward with a renewed sense of clarity, with a lot more courage, with more confidence. Because all of these patterns of just like trying to hate ourselves into some level of achievement are not very effective. They're actually massive blocks, and they're not easy to lay down when they've been really ingrained, right? There's so much fear at the center of them that it feels like that fear is propelling us forward. So there are things that we do early in a coaching relationship that allows you to shift the way that you are in relationship with yourself that starts to create that forward momentum. So if you're curious about that, you can book an exploratory call. It's the easiest way to get started. It's at brilliant-balance.com/schedule, right? Just go there, brilliant-balance.com. That's the website, /schedule. That'll let you book an exploratory call. You also can take a look at all of the information about the Bold experience. If this is new to you and you're curious about what I'm even talking about, you can go to /bold at the website. And those are two great places to start learning, like, what am I doing? What can I do to help you make this shift in your own life? And I will tell you, whether you leverage me and my team to help you do this or whether you do this on your own, it is a powerful shift to make and one that I hope you will. That is all for today, my friends. Until next time, let's be brilliant.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.